I've been asked if I can make a video about digital ID, which of course is a very important and relevant topic. Here in Britain, the Labour government are currently trying to impose digital ID upon us, and many governments in countries around the world are currently dabbling with this idea as well. So it's a very important topic. It's a very relevant topic. And I thought I would indeed spend some time in this video really getting to grips with this, why governments are suddenly so keen to do this, and what the stakes are if digital ID is indeed introduced. Now, we've got a lot of ground to cover here. There's a lot of bases to touch upon. So without any further ado, let's just get right into it. Broadly speaking, there are two ways of ordering society. One system is called collectivism, and the other is called individualism, or individual liberty is perhaps a better way of describing it. Now, socialists, the political left, believe in collectivism. Collectivism says you must always put the interests of the group before the interests of the individual. So individuals must sacrifice their own individuality, their own interests, thoughts, desires, aspirations, and freedoms to conform to the group for the sake of group harmony and unity. That's really the end goal of this system, group harmony and group unity. So whatever the group believes, thinks, says, and does, it is the duty of all individuals to conform to that group for the sake of unity. Now, on first hearing, there sounds like there's some merit in that idea. Group unity and harmony, that sounds quite nice. But the problem for collectivists, though, is that people are not all the same. The reality is that we are all individuals. We don't all think the same things, and we don't all want to live our lives in the same way. So this ideology is effectively anti-human. It is against our true human nature. The truth is we do have our own thoughts and dreams and aspirations. It's not our natural state of being to all think, believe, and say and do the same things. So in order to force us into coordinated behavior, socialists believe the state should have tremendous power to force this kind of straitjacket of conformism upon us. The state should have the power to tell us what to think and say and believe and how to behave, and should have the power to punish anyone who disrupts the unity by deviating and going off in their own direction, having a wild, independent thought of their own. So basically, if we are to live coordinated, the state must act as the great coordinator. So that's what this guy is. This is the state telling everyone what to think, believe, say, and do. And this black oval represents a kind of straitjacket on the people. Hope this makes sense. So if you go to North Korea, for example, perhaps the most extreme collectivist nation on earth today, they take great pride in producing displays like these, which show thousands of people moving in complete coordinated harmony. In these shows, there is no individual. Each person is just a cog in a machine, a pixel on a screen. And the point of pride here is that it is the state that has choreographed them to move in such harmony. This is a picture of how socialists want to run society in general. An all-powerful ruling elite, or even dictator, who has the power to move the citizens around as they wish, for the purpose of harmony and unity. They believe the end justifies the means here, and that individuals must sacrifice their own thoughts, interests, and freedoms for the greater good of societal harmony and unity. Now, the conservative worldview is the opposite. The conservative believes in the intrinsic liberty of man. The conservative believes that human beings are not just cogs in a machine or a pixel on a screen. We are not just robots to be programmed by the state. We are not puppets of a ruling class who get to tell us what to think, believe, say, and do. We are not the property of the state. We are not the plaything of the state. We are not a mere number. We are not a prisoner. We are human beings made in the image of God with unique hopes and dreams and aspirations, our own intellect, our own creativity, and we are born to live free. The conservative believes the natural condition of human beings is to live in freedom. And to treat us as anything less is to deprive us of human dignity. It is degrading and demeaning to treat human beings as mere state property. And indeed, it's called tyranny when you take freedom away and force people to follow the orders of an elite who tell them what to think, believe, say, and do. There is no concept in history for which mankind has been more willing to die than the concept of freedom. We are born to live free, and we would often rather die than live caged under tyranny. That's how intrinsic to human beings freedom is. So conservatives believe we dignify people by letting them pursue life, liberty, and happiness in their own way. And conservatives believe that as individuals do this, using their own intellect and creativity and pursuing their own goals and dreams, they will build society from the ground up. Socialists believe in a top-down authoritarian approach, but conservatives believe that as people think freely and dream and pursue their own goals and use their own intellect and creativity, they will build societies from the ground up with families and businesses and communities, and they'll innovate and create and move society forward. Indeed, you only get true innovation in free societies, because it's only in free societies that people are allowed to be curious and ask questions and explore and think original thoughts and share and debate original ideas. Ideas. None of that is allowed in collectivist societies. In collectivist societies, you must only think state-approved thoughts and do state-approved things. So those are the two options. And essentially what we're asking here is, do you believe that power should be centralized in a few elite rulers who then dictate how the ruled are allowed to live? Or do you believe that power should be diffused to the people to make decisions for themselves in freedom? Centralized power or diffused power? Now, if for some reason you're shouting, this one, I like this one, collectivist tyranny sounds better to me, then I'm going to give you 3 reasons why you're wrong. I'm going to give 3 reasons why collectivist centralized systems always fail. The first problem of centralizing power in a few elite hands is that it's an incredibly inefficient system. This is a little bit counterintuitive, but it turns out that millions of people making free, independent, seemingly random decisions about their own lives creates a more efficient society than a country that is guided by just a few philosopher kings, to use the Platonic term, just a few ruling elites making all of the decisions on our behalf. It turns out that no matter how smart the elites are, or think they are not smart enough to efficiently run the lives of hundreds of millions of people better than what they would do it themselves. Now, a picture that might help us understand this is how we deal with traffic at intersections, believe it or not. This sounds like a very boring analogy, and it might be, but this is what I always think of when comparing these two ideologies: centralized power, collectivism, and diffused free power over on this side. Broadly speaking, let's go with it and see where this goes. Broadly speaking, we've devised 2 ways to process traffic at intersections: traffic lights, which is a centralized system, and roundabouts, which is a diffused system. So have you ever been driving on an empty road and you approach a 4-way intersection and there are traffic lights on red? Now you look to the left and there's nothing coming. You look to the right and there's nothing coming. You look ahead and nothing is coming. You can see for hundreds of meters in all directions and there's nothing else on the road. And yet the centralized system, this traffic light, is on red, and so you have to wait. If it was in your hands, if power had been diffused to you to use your own common sense, you could go ahead and be about your business, and that would be far more efficient. But that power has been taken from you as an individual, and you're now being dictated to by this top-down system, this traffic light. The traffic light is on red. It says you have to wait. So you have to wait. Sometimes you have to wait there for minutes. It's incredibly frustrating and inefficient. Now, roundabouts are an example of a diffused system. When you approach a 4-way intersection with a roundabout, power is now in the hands of the people, and you get to decide using your own common sense individually when it's time to move. So you approach, you look to the side, you see that nothing's coming, and off you go. You get to make that decision. And here's the thing. Even though roundabouts look more random and chaotic, it turns out that when you let people make their own free decisions, it's actually hugely more efficient. Roundabouts are up to 89% more efficient than traffic lights. They improve traffic flow and cut congestion, and they cut crashes by up to 90%. So they're safer as well. This is a great example of what we're talking about here. When you centralize power with the state, it doesn't matter how smart the state is. They're not smart enough to run tens of millions of lives better than what they would do it themselves. Their few brains are never better than millions of brains making micro decisions from second to second about their own lives. Doesn't matter how well you design those traffic lights. They're never going to be more efficient than all of these individuals using their own eyes and their own ears, their own intellect, using context, reading social cues, spotting gaps, which is what's going on at roundabouts. When you let people live free and make their own decisions, it looks more chaotic, which is why I've got all of these people kind of scattered around. Hope this image makes sense as well. It looks more chaotic, but you get more efficient outcomes, believe it or not. I mean, think of the hundreds of decisions that you make about your life every single day. Let's say it's coming up for lunchtime and you need to make a decision about when to eat lunch. So you think about it and you think, actually, I don't feel hungry yet. And you gauge you probably won't feel hungry for another hour or so. Only you have access to that contextual information. So to maximize the efficiency of your day, you decide to delay lunch and use that hour to run an errand instead. But then just as you're heading out the door to do that errand, a phone call comes in and that changes the picture again. And that means you've got to go and be somewhere very quickly. So you decide, well, what I'll do now is I'll grab a takeaway lunch. I'll take it with me and then I'll eat it when I get there, whenever I feel hungry. So you're constantly adapting based on contextual information that only you're aware of and which is rapidly changing. And when you get millions of people around us doing the same thing with their lives, everyone's doing what they need to do to get on, it's incredibly efficient. It looks chaotic, but it's incredibly efficient. Whereas centralized systems lack that minute-to-minute contextual information. And if a centralized power was scheduling your day and when to have lunch, it'd often feel like sitting at a red traffic light. There'd be a lot of dead time when you're waiting for allotted time slots. Time would be wasted. So you see what I mean? Conservatives dignify people by saying, look, you're an independent adult. You're smart. You can make your own decisions. You can run your own life. So go and do it. Socialist elites treat people as idiots or children and effectively say, we can run your life better than you can. So we'll take control of it and do it for you. And it never works out as well. Big government operations are always notoriously inefficient. A second problem with socialist or collectivist systems is that they require a lot of resources and man hours and energy and expense to maintain. Because the concept is anti-human, humans will always naturally want to live free and think their own thoughts and speak their own words and do their own things. So to enforce that straitjacket of conformity on people requires a lot of manpower and energy and expense. If you think of East Germany, for example, under communist rule, the Soviets had to employ vast numbers of people to keep an eye on society and to make sure that everyone was being a good, obedient collectivist and nobody was deviating from the party line. To make sure nobody was having an independent thought or was speaking freely, they deployed hundreds of thousands of secret police and informants throughout society to eavesdrop on conversations and keep an eye on people and follow them around and tap their phone lines. It's estimated that in 1989, around 500,000 East Germans, or 1 in every 6.5, had to be employed by the state to be a member of this vast spy network. And this is always the problem in collectivist systems. In fact, unfortunately, we caught a glimpse of this in Great Britain during COVID. During COVID, the British government suspended free democracy and copied collectivist communist China in removing individual freedoms and centralizing power in the state, who then began dictating what we could do and what we could not do in our daily lives. So they began implementing lockdowns and harsh behavioral rules about masks and so forth. And they demanded total obedience to the state. Now, in order to maintain that control, firstly, They sent out the police to spy on people, but even that wasn't enough because people are independent and think their own thoughts. Even just deploying the police wasn't enough. So what they did was they started telling people to snitch on their neighbors. They started trying to recruit this massive spy network to make sure that everyone was following the state rules. And this always happens with collectivist systems. Naturally speaking, we are not all the same. We are individuals. So to keep millions of unique individuals conformed to a state narrative requires a lot of resources and man hours and expense. And normally that is unsustainable and it pulls down the whole thing. A third problem with collectivist states is they always become filled with corruption and hypocrisy as well. Power always corrupts. So when you centralize power in the hands of a few elites, you can guarantee that corruption will soon follow and hypocrisy will soon follow as well. And again, unfortunately, we saw this during COVID in Great Britain, when the British government were imposing all of these harsh, anti-human, controlling restrictions on the people. They were soon exposed as flouting their own rules. The Prime Minister told citizens they couldn't meet together, and then he was found throwing birthday parties in 10 Downing Street. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, was filmed groping his assistant, breaking his own social distancing rules. The chief advisor was caught going on a day trip to a castle. The ones making the rules didn't follow the rules themselves, and collectivist systems always end up like this. Because the rules are anti-human and defy our nature, rulers always excuse themselves from living under their own rules. So it becomes rules for thee, but not for me. Which is why I've put the state outside of the straitjacket. The states appear outside of the rules that it's enforcing on everyone else. Remember, the Pharisees in the Bible were like this. They imposed harsh rules on the population, but then didn't follow the rules themselves, which is why Jesus called them whitewashed tombs and unwashed cups. That happens every single time under collectivist societies. Joseph Stalin imposed harsh rules on everyone else, but he and the Soviet elite, they lived in palaces. They lived in luxury. Collectivist elites today will try to restrict our travel, but allow it for themselves. They'll try to stop us eating meat, but they'll have all the meat they want, and so forth. So these are 3 reasons why collectivist systems always fail. They're inefficient, they're expensive, and they always lead to corruption. Now, just for balance, and before we continue, it should be noted that systems based on individual liberty can fail too. And the thing that causes this system to fail is sin or selfishness. You see, if you're going to diffuse power to millions of individuals to make their own decisions, you need to make sure that those individuals are internally ordered and are good moral beings. So they make good decisions with their freedom. Think about the roundabout again. The roundabout system works in an orderly fashion because everyone knows the rules of the roundabout, first of all. But more importantly, everyone's willing to play by those rules of their own volition. The rules say that if you approach the junction and someone else is already on the roundabout, you must be willing to wait your turn and let others go first. If you decided one day, I'm not playing by those rules anymore, I'm just going to selfishly fire through this junction and everyone else is going to have to deal with it. If everyone started acting like that, there would soon be crashes and chaos, and the roundabout system would not work. The whole thing would break down. And at that point, the government would then step in and say, well, clearly you can't be left to your own devices, so we're going to take power from you and install traffic lights. We're going to move to a centralized system. In other words, since you won't order yourselves, we will take control and order it for you, and power would become centralized. This is how civilizations move from freedom to tyranny. Moral degradation is the first thing that begins to create chaos in society. And that's the pretext the state uses for transferring power to itself. Necessity is the plea of tyrants, as the old saying goes. The Roman historian Tacitus once wrote, the more corrupt the state, the more numerous the laws, meaning moral decay and loss of public virtue causes governments to produce excessive legislation to begin to control more and more aspects of our life. In a virtuous society, people inherently do what's right. But in a corrupt society, laws begin to multiply to curb and control the bad behavior, and power becomes centralized. This is why we say that Christianity is the bedrock of Western civilization and Western freedom. Christianity is the force that has for centuries produced this necessary internal order in the hearts of individuals that has caused them to make good decisions with their freedom, and that's allowed us to sustain a free society. Edmund Burke once said, "Men are qualified for civil liberty in exact proportion to their disposition to put moral chains upon their own appetites." Society cannot exist unless a controlling power upon will and appetite be placed somewhere, and the less of it there is within, the more there must be without. It is ordained in the eternal constitution of things that men of intemperate minds cannot be free. Their passions forge their fetters. So here's the choice we have in front of us. Either God rules our hearts from within, making us good, and therefore we use our freedom to choose well, or the state will take power to control us from without, and we'll be ruled by tyrants. As William Penn noted, either be governed by God or be ruled by tyrants. Those are the two options. This is what I tried to explain way back in 2012 with Stay Free, why society can't survive without God. All those years ago, it was the second book and video series I ever made. If we're going to diffuse power into millions of individuals, those individuals must be good. And for that, we need God. We need the Bible in the hearts, the Holy Spirit in the hearts of every man, woman, boy, and child. Christianity is the foundation of our freedom. I know there's many people out there who are not ready to hear that yet. There are still some people who were brainwashed by the new atheist movement of Hitchens, Harris, and Dawkins all those years ago, and they think that we can be free without God. It's not true. It can't happen. The most pressing need of our time is for people to come back to God so we can sustain a free, happy, healthy society. So those are the reasons why each system fails. Now, at the moment, unfortunately, there is a cabal of socialist elites who believe in this collectivist tyrannical model. And they're trying to impose this system upon us in the West and across the entire world. And to that end, they're currently trying to remove individual liberties and freedoms from us to centralize power around themselves. Now, what's making them especially excited right now, in fact, it's making them giddy, is that they believe that emerging digital technology, and especially AI, can help them overcome all of these old inefficiencies and expenses that have always pulled this system down in the past. It won't do anything for corruption, but that doesn't concern them as they'll be the ones benefiting from the corruption. So they'll be telling us that we can't travel, but they'll still be flying around in private jets. They'll tell us that we can't have meat, but they'll still be having all the meat that they like. So they'll be excusing themselves from following all of these rules. But they believe that these two issues can be solved with digital technology and AI. And the center of their plan here, to bring it round to the question, is digital ID. The plan here is that each person will soon be issued with a digital ID, and every piece of information about you will be linked to that ID. Now, the government will then have access to that information, and they will use it for control. So currently, all kinds of companies hold data on us of one kind or another. If you have a supermarket loyalty card, the supermarkets know your shopping habits and the things that you buy. Your bank has all of your financial information. The hospital knows your health data. Energy companies have data on your gas and electricity consumption and when you're using it. If you have social media accounts, they've got data on your interests and what you watch, what you think, what you post online. Spotify gathers data on what music and podcasts you listen to. So the idea is that all of this data, which is now separately held by all of these companies, will be centralized and tied to a single government-issued digital ID. So the government will then have access to all of this information. The government will know everything about you, what you're buying at the supermarket, what your finances are, what your energy usage is, what you're watching online, what you think. And using AI, all of this information can be analyzed and summarized really efficiently. In the past, collating and organizing all of this information about millions of people would have required a lot of man hours and expense. And even then, it pretty much would have been impossible. But now with AI, all of this is very possible, and you can do this very, very quickly. You can summarize information about people very quickly. Now, once the government knows all of this information, it can then use it for control to make you behave exactly how they wish. So imagine this. Imagine you go to the supermarket and you try to buy some chicken or some beef. But when you try to pay for it, your payment is declined because the government has determined that you've already used all of your carbon credits for the month. So the checkout won't accept the payment card, which is now linked to your digital ID. Or maybe you want to buy some chocolate or a milkshake or a hamburger, but the government now knows your health data and decrees you must lose weight before you eat these things. So you aren't allowed to buy any chocolate or milkshake or hamburgers. Or imagine you want to book a flight, but you can't because you've used your carbon credits and the government has blocked it. Or you want to turn on your heating or air conditioning, but again, it won't switch on for the same reason. Remember, the government also wants everyone to be driving electric cars connected to the internet in the future. So imagine you get into your car one day and you press the start button, but it won't start because you've used your carbon credits. Or maybe the government has decreed the roads are too busy today, so your car will only start at off-peak times or when the traffic dies down. Or maybe you just did something the state didn't like, so they've reduced your general social credit score, and that means your car privileges have been suspended for a week. They could also geofence car travel using GPS, so your car will stop working outside a certain boundary, limiting the distances that you can travel, and so forth and so forth. You get the picture. Digital ID is the key that unlocks all of this control for the socialist elites. And using technology, it becomes far more efficient, more automated, and less expensive. Without digital ID, they can't implement this. But with digital ID, the potential for knowing everything about us and controlling our behavior becomes absolutely limitless. That's why they're so excited about this. The state could then decide where we go, if we can go, when we can go, for how long we can go, what we buy, what we sell, if we can buy, or if we can sell. And we are now no longer free. We are at the mercy of the state. And of course, as Christians, we know that from there, it's only a very small step to the mark of the beast, where you get this chip with the digital ID in your wrist or in your forehead, and you can't buy or sell without it. Revelation's been telling us about this for a very long time. Again, the socialist mind is getting giddy at the potential for the control here. They're trying to build a digital infrastructure essentially to enslave us. We already see this happening in collectivist China, where people have a social credit score and the state controls and punishes and rewards people for how obedient they are to their rulers. That's the future that socialist elites are planning for us here in the West and across the entire world. And it all hinges on digital ID. If they get digital ID through the door, they can do all of this other stuff. But if they can't, then they won't be able to do all of that other stuff. So it's all hinging on digital ID. Now, it's for these reasons then that freedom-loving people simply can't allow digital ID to happen. This is going to be one of the key political battles of our generation, perhaps the key political battle of our generation, because if this comes in, it changes everything. It's that important. If digital ID is implemented, then our freedom is quite simply over. It's gone. If digital ID comes in, from that moment, we become slaves of the state, the property of the state. We are no longer free men and women. We are prisoners of the elite. We are a number, and it cannot be allowed to happen. Now, just one last thing. I'll talk about Britain for just a second. I know less about the history of other countries, but here in Britain, ever since Magna Carta was signed about 1,000 years ago, we've had a very clear and specific definition of individual freedom in this country. English common law says that people on this island are free to do anything they want that is not specifically prohibited by law. So you are free to think, speak, and do whatever you want, day or night. And as long as you're not specifically breaking the law, the state has absolutely no right to know about what you're doing or to interfere. So what this means is, if you're going about your day in a public space in Britain and a police officer approaches to ask for ID or asks what you're doing there or where you're going, British people don't have to tell them because you're free. The state has no right to know this information. It has no right to know about your business or to interfere in your life in any way. Indeed, A.J.P. Taylor wrote that until the First World War, a sensible law-abiding Brit could pass through life and have no interaction with the state at all, except for maybe at the post office and with a local policeman. You could live your life with almost no interaction with the state at all. The state would know almost nothing about you and would have no business in your life. You would live free, going where you please, pursuing life, liberty, and happiness in your own way. Now, in Europe, things have always been a little bit different. So whereas in English common law, you can do anything you want as long as it's not specifically prohibited, in Europe, the general principle is kind of reversed. In Europe, you're allowed to do things only if you can show that you are specifically permitted to do those things. So in Britain, if a police officer approaches and wants to know where you're going, what you're doing, you don't have to tell them or produce ID. You don't have to tell them. In Europe, you do. You do have to produce papers and explain your business and prove that you are allowed to do that thing. So in Europe, for example, when you check into a hotel in Europe, they will often ask for your passport and inform the local police station because that's a requirement. In Britain, hotels don't have to do that because the state has no right to that information. It has no right to know who you are and where you're staying because you are free. So Britain has for centuries had a very clear and specific idea of freedom, and we have fought against a papers, please kind of society where you have to explain to the authorities who you are and what you're doing. We believe that the state is our servant, not our master. If we want the state, we'll call for you, but otherwise stay out of our business. Protect the borders, police the streets. That's all we want from you, more or less. Stay out of our business. So it would be an unspeakable tragedy, here especially, if we were the generation that gave up all of those freedoms after 1,000 years and allowed the state to become our overlords, allowed the state to insert itself into every single aspect of life, knowing everything about us and controlling and dictating where we go, what we think, what we say, what we buy. This is absolutely intolerable that we can move from freedom to this kind of tyranny. And if digital ID happens, that's where we'd be. We'd move from freedom to slavery, from liberty to totalitarianism. We would become a plaything of the state, a cog, a slave, a puppet, a robot, a number, and it cannot be allowed to happen at any cost. If there is a political hill to die on, then it's this one. We cannot let digital ID be introduced.